Hello, I am Tara, and this is my mom Jill. We are from Living on a Dime, and we wrote the Dining on a Dime cookbook. Right here, you can eat better, spend less with Dining on a Dime. Today, we are talking about Mom's story of how she lived, spent $500, had $500 a month to live on, and then her story kind of evolved into more story.
And paid off $35,000 worth of debt after my husband left and everything.
So we've been talking about ways and things that happened to her during that time. So right now we are at where I'm pregnant with my second child, and that's where we left off in our last video. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I was driving. I'd gone to Kansas to be with my son's and his wife and their new baby that was born premature. And then I was frantically driving back to Idaho because Tawra had to be put on bed rest, and Michael was working in Washington, and she had nobody to help her back there while she was on bed rest. So I barely eked in just in time with Michael heading back to work, and I then was taking care of her. And this time, I'd taken care of her before when she was on bed rest, and thought it was interesting, but now we had a 9-month-old baby thrown in the mix, which was even more exciting and kept me busy. So I was once again, doing laundry. We had one baby in diapers, and I was doing all the laundry, pushing him in a stroller, doing all that. So it was it was a little much more busy. And were you looking for houses at that time yet?
Yeah. So, and we were looking for houses because Mike was working 100 miles from home, and he was only home 4 nights and 3 days a week, and then he spent 3 nights and 4 days a week at work. And so we had started looking for houses in Pullman, Washington, which was closer to where he worked. We lived in Nezperce, Idaho at the time. So
throw into the mix, we were trying to keep the house,
I think we had the house on the market. Did we have it on the market then?
I was trying to
remember. I don't know if we actually had our house for sale yet or not. I think we maybe did. No, I know we did. Yeah, we did.
So we were having to keep the house market ready, and it was so funny. I don't know if we started, I'll tell you about it here, but I don't know if we started doing this after Elly was born or at this point. But what we did in case you need to do moving things, we took and we had, Tawra's house was tiny. It was so tiny, she couldn't even keep the refrigerator in the kitchen. I've mentioned this before. She had to have the refrigerator on the back porch. So we're talking tiny living room, barely had room for the couch and a chair, and then just a little floor space. Well, now we've got baby jumpy toys and walker things and bouncy seats and baby toys for a 9-month-old, baskets of toys. You can just imagine what it was like. So if we found out somebody was going to come look at the house, I thought this was clever of us. I really did think this was so clever of us. We panicked. Well, not the panicking wasn't clever, but what we did to take care of the panic, what we did was I had an old clunker green pickup, and we'd back it up to her front door, and we'd stand there and we'd just toss walkers and jumpy seats and baskets of toys and baskets of dirty clothes and piles of dirty laundry and baskets of the drainers with the dirty dishes. We just shove it all on the back of the pickup. I mean, we put some amazing things. We also would throw things like just any toys, anything we could think of, we'd throw them inside the wash machine, to hide them. We found some of the coolest spots and we got good at this. We, within 5 to 10 minutes flat, could have that house, boom, in instant good shape. Everything wiped down. And you can imagine having a 9-month-old, if any of you have had this, with the mom on bed rest, with the house, it was hard to keep up with. So I thought I was right proud of us on that one. So we had that little bit of excitement added in on top of everything else. Well, BJ will just kill me if I tell this. Remember the time they came out with these bouncy exercisers, and the kids could bounce in them and twirl themselves around. I walked over there one day, and the silly Goofy, he was in cloth diapers, and he'd had diarrhea, and he was spinning in that bouncing seat, and it was spinning that diarrhea all over the living room. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, it didn't go quite that far.
I mean,
yeah.
it was flinging everywhere. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you clean up something like that that's been flung all over? But I didn't know it. It was going to get even worse than that.
Well, and Mike was home that day, and he just lifted BJ out and hosed him off.
Yeah,
outside,
I thought I could not. That was so bad. That was so bad on so many accounts. But anyway, so those were just some of the few little things we were dealing with at that time. And we would have to drive her in to, we'd go, twice a week? When you had contractions into the hospital? Once a week?
About once a week.
Once a week. Well, the closer she got to delivery, the more often we were going in. And so we'd have to drive her into the hospital, which was in another town, see? And they'd put her on the monitor. Well, then I had BJ, who was 9 months old. And, well, you can't keep a 9-month-old in a car seat. I kind of laugh at the germaphobes when they worry about it, because you have to let them crawl around on the hospital floor. I mean, she would be there for a couple of hours sometimes, and I physically could not hold him and keep him still and do all that. He'd get so tired. It was kind of hard, because then he would get tired because he didn't get his nap. None of my grandkids or kids would just fall asleep, but, they just had to be in their bed to sleep. Then we were doing Eddie at the time. Eddie, I think we were taking him.
Yeah, we decided to get another dog to be a friend for our dog, which was the stupidest thing we ever did.
He literally was had mental issues. And so we were fighting that, dealing with that.
He was a rescue dog, and his owner had died, and he was left in the house for several days by himself, and then he was mentally off. We took him to the Washington State vet thing, and they said that he was the worst case they'd ever seen. They even put him on Prozac. And we were like, okay.
So we had this Prozac
mental case dog.
So we were running him all over. Like she said, we took him to Washington at one point. So we were dealing with this, and so he was tearing up the carpet. He was trying to tear up the walls. He was just a nightmare. And we had this little baby, and we were like, okay, this is not. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
So it wasn't, and then Tara could not walk. She couldn't do anything. And so it was really, I got really tired at this point. I was starting to wear out. And so finally one day, it was an exceptionally exhausting day. I think we left about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'd been gone all day long. We'd gone, I forget where all we went. We'd gone from one city to another, it seems like. I think we went into Cottonwood to take Eddie to the vet or something, or we took him to the vet, and she said he needed medicine, which was in Lewiston, and we had to drive into Lewiston, which is an hour and a half away, another town, get medicine for him. Then we drove back in. Then I think you started having contractions. We took you to the hospital in the other town again, and was at the hospital for a couple of hours. Then we drove back home. And BJ was in the car exhausted. You can't even, and Tara and I were like vegetables at this point. And we got home, it was about 5:30. It was dark, so I don't know what time it was. And I carried BJ in, and Tara got into the house and sat down, and finally got him calmed down, because he was just hysterical at this point. That poor baby was just hysterical. I was juggling him, trying to get, patting him and trying to get him calmed down. I finally got him calmed down in his bed and asleep. And I remember so well, like I came tiptoeing out of his bedroom. Tara was on the couch on the phone, and I collapsed in the other chair. And I heard, first words I heard her out of her mouth say,
Good.
I haven't told Mom yet. I knew she was talking to Mike. I haven't told Mom yet, but you better hurry up and get here and drive fast.
Well, now, BJ isn't 9 months old at this point.
No.
Now he's 14 months old. This is 5 months later.
Yeah, later.
Yeah. So
bouncing it was even harder.
This is 5 months later, yes.
And she said, I haven't told Mom yet. When even your adult kids, it's bad when they're little, but it's almost worse when your adult kids say, I haven't told Mom yet. And I'm thinking, oh no. I knew exactly what she was going to say. So she told Michael, she said, you drive fast and meet me at the hospital, because he had to drive, a different direction. And so I said, all right, I'll get your bags in the car and I'll go get BJ. And she said, no. She said, you're not getting that baby out of that bed. I'm driving myself. I said, no way am I letting you drive yourself in labor 30 miles, January, in the dark, in the dead of winter, in Idaho, in no man's land. I don't even know if she saw one car. It sat deserted, driving there. I said, you're not going to do it. And we were arguing, and she said, no, we're not getting that baby out of that bed again. We're not doing that. And we stood there about a good 5 minutes, and finally I knew I had to kind of give in, because she was not going to budge on this. And I thought, well, I'm just keeping her from going to the hospital. I felt like a horrible mother letting my daughter drive herself in labor to the hospital 30 miles away like this. And I said,
lived to tell about it.
She lived to tell. Yes, she did. I told her, I said, we didn't have cell phones. I said, you get to that hospital. I'm timing you as soon as you walk out that door. You get there, and you better call me the instant you walk through those doors. I said, otherwise, I'm going to figure out something. We had nobody to help us. We were really isolated. When we say we had nobody, we just had nobody. And I said, I'm going to start calling people if you don't call me, because I was timing her. She must have driven pretty fast, because I think it only took you about 20 minutes that time to get there. It didn't take you very long to get there. And she did call me right away. And she said she thought Michael flew, because Michael was made half the time it normally took him.
And BJ and Elly were both 3 weeks early. So just so you have a perspective there, it wasn't their due date. I was early by 3 weeks with both of them. So
yeah, that's why it was just so out of whack. And so she got to the hospital, and Michael met her at the hospital then, and I stayed the night. Then I was there with BJ, and this was where the fun this was one of the roughest times I think we all kind of went through.
I was having a good old time. I had all my food made for me. I didn't have to do any housekeeping.
She was up there. This was at night. Well, I didn't even get any sleep, of course, because I was expecting Michael to call and tell me the baby was born. So 0 sleep this night. BJ got up about 5:30 or something
next
morning.
I went into the hospital at 4 o'clock that afternoon. It was 4 o'clock that afternoon.
Was it 4? Yeah. It was dark, though.
But it was dark. Idaho. Idaho gets dark at 3 o'clock. So it was 4 o'clock. I remember because I was watching Oprah. And I wanted to finish my Oprah. This was before Oprah went downhill. And so I went to the hospital. I got to the hospital at 4:30, somewhere around there. So, yes.
Yeah, I thought it was around 5 or something, yeah. And so
I want them to know how long I was in labor.
You want to know the exact time.
That's important.
It was. So that was that whole night. Then I expected the baby Elly to be born, and she wasn't. So BJ's awake at 5:30, and I hadn't been to bed yet.
Because they kept telling me, oh, this is your second. It's going to go really, really fast. You've been having contractions for 6 months. You're going to go fast.
Yeah.
So we get to the hospital, and
Nothing.
I don't.
So the next morning, all she's doing is laying up there having contractions. But Michael and I...
No drugs, I might add.
Michael and I had been awake all night.
Well, do you think I was sleeping?
I know. I'm being smart with you. And see, I got a right raise out of you. And it worked, didn't it? But so here we all were, the exhaustion you can't even describe. So we're waiting, and all day long, she's going. I did finally get to lay down when BJ took his hour nap, as if I really slept a lot, because I'm still waiting for Mike to call. I've got to give my son, I've said this before, my son and Michael, I can't give him a big enough medal. Back then you didn't have cell phones. And where they were, it was long distance to call to let me know when any of the babies were being born. They faithfully called me every 30 minutes.
Use a calling card.
Yeah, you had to do find a phone in the hospital, use a calling card. So calling was a really hard, kind of distracting and hard to do. But my David and Michael both, they faithfully called me every 30, 45 minutes to let me know what was happening. But I was able, like I said, to get the one nap in. And then about, I don't know, what time was she born in the afternoon? It's late afternoon.
2. I was in labor 22 hours with no drugs. Thank you very much.
She was born at 2?
Yes.
I think...
No drugs.
I think he came to get me, though. It was closer to like maybe 3:30, something like that, later in the afternoon. He said, see, what happened was Tawra had taken my car up to the hospital, and Michael had their car at the hospital, so I had no way of going up there myself. So Michael had to drive all the way from the other town, from the hospital, to come get BJ and I, so we could go up to see the baby and everything. So we're all excited because we're going to go up and see the Elly Jean. We were just beside ourselves with excitement. And Michael came. We walked in the hospital room. It was awful. Tawra just broke down. And you got to know my daughter. She's not the type of person that just really loses her cool. Well, unless you're telling them to get it together, people. But she's not the type that she's a pretty strong gal. You know, she doesn't lose it that often, but she broke down. And Michael immediately was over there trying to comfort her. And they said that, she said the baby wasn't breathing right. And it was, but that, let me backtrack here a second. When we told you earlier how small that hospital was, there was only like 10 beds. There were 11, right?
So on the night Elly was born, they normally had about one baby a month, and it was a 10-bed hospital. 2 were maternity. The rest was just regular hospital. And actually, I think like 5 was geriatric, and the other 3 were just regular. And on the night Elly was born, a storm had come. And there were 8 babies born in 24 hours, which was the most babies they had ever had born at that hospital at once. And to put it in perspective, I got the labor room because I got there first. But these other not so quiet ladies, which I would have appreciated if they would have kept it down a little bit. But these other ladies that were having babies, they were having them in the hallway and in the operating room. And even they had opened a closet door to have space for people because there was not enough room. All the hospital beds somehow had been taken up. And then all these babies decided to be born with this storm. And so it was they'd never had that many. And it was so bad that they had to call the nuns.
There was a convent
from
in that
the
town.
From the convent to come and help nurse because they had run out of nurses. You know, I mean, they probably only had 3 or 4 nurses at any one time on maybe 5. I don't know. So they had to call the convent to have the nuns come and help nurse. And I got one of the nuns. And so, yeah.
Just so you can understand the chaos. That the chaos that we walked into. And then Tawra was just... hysterical, which she had every reason to be. And come to find out, Elly, we later found out she had a hole in her lungs and she couldn't breathe. And so they were having to call Flight for Life in. And the nurse asked me right away, she said, do you want to go see her? Because they had her in a separate area. And I said, well, yeah. And so I went with the nurse, and the nurse took a picture of her, and she said, here's a picture of her.
This was how they were keeping her alive, with that little tube. That was how they were keeping her alive. It was crazy. Right there, just that little tube, they were just holding it on her. And I didn't realize till later on that when the nurse gave me the picture, she thought that might be the only picture that we would ever have of her. She was that bad. And I thanked her for it. Well, and so I did. It's a good thing I didn't realize it at the time. I would have really lost it. But they went and
the closest hospital was 4.5 hours away by driving. It was up in Spokane, and they called Flight for Life in
the middle of a blizzard.
Storm.
It was a blizzard. This was not just a little storm. It was a blizzard.
Yeah. You guys, I am sorry. And I'm going to cry again. I know. I'm trying not to cry again. These men and women that do this.
Yeah. They risk their lives to save yours.
Risk their life.
Yeah.
For my little baby girl, granddaughter. I cannot say enough about them. And you've got to, I hope you all appreciate everything these guys do that do this stuff. I mean, it was terrifying what they were coming through, the storm they were coming through to try to get this baby to the hospital to save her. And our police officers, our military, our rescue workers, you guys, I'm sorry. You had better not say anything bad about any of them in my presence, because I've never knocked anybody's block off, but I would be tempted to. You can tell how emotional this meant so much to us. But anyway, get that over with. Anyway, we had to make the decision because they said one of the parents could go up with her in the plane, but we didn't know. Tawra had to be taken up to the hospital the next morning, driven up there. I had to stay there with BJ and take care of him. So we had nobody to drive Tawra up. Michael really had to take her, so he couldn't really go on the plane. Tawra was physically, she just delivered.
What happened was, Mike, they said Flight for Life was coming. So Mom got to see her for a few minutes, and then Mike took BJ and Mom home. And he went to go pack so he could fly with her up there, is what happened. And then, when they got there, though, we were like, well, how am I going to get up there? Because I couldn't really, after 22 hours of labor, I wasn't in any condition to drive. So then we were like, well, what are we going to do?
We had to make the decision to let her go by herself. Yeah. And that's a scary decision to make, to let your child just go with strangers in a blizzard, off into no man's land, and you didn't know what was. Yeah. It's hard to release your child like that. It was my grandchild, but, it was ours. And that was really hard to do. So finally, that's what they decided to do. And I'd help Michael get his stuff packed. And so then they decided that they were going to leave first thing in the morning. Michael was going to drive. We let her go, and Michael was going to drive her up. Well, we drove home. We'd gotten home from the hospital, so I helped Michael get his stuff pulled together. Well, then Michael called and said that they were going to leave in the morning. So
he came back to the hospital then. Mike came back to the hospital. Flight for Life got there. So then that's when we made the decision to have him stay, because Flight for Life... Because we were like, well, do we go or do we not? And they said, well, we can't make any guarantees. They said, but we will tell you that this equipment that we have is so far technically advanced from what she's doing right now that she's way better off in this incubator on the Flight for Life plane than she is here in the hospital. And we're pretty sure that she will make it at least through to get the morning, and it would be okay for you to wait to come up tomorrow. Well, so what happened then was Mike followed the ambulance out to the airport, and this is not an airport.
No, we're not. We're talking
this
pathway.
Is a strip of asphalt in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. A strip of asphalt with a steel building for the hangars. Because it's a crop duster airport. There were no lights.
Well, I hate to interrupt you. What these airports were, our airport was the same, and one night they had to Flight for Life somebody from our little town, and they called all the people in town to line up along the airport strip with their cars to give lighting so they could land. Yeah. This tells you how
small it was.
Yeah.
And so Mike went out. Well, they couldn't call it. The blizzard was so bad, they couldn't really have anybody come out or anything. So this airport has no lights, no nothing. So here's Mike putting our newborn daughter on this plane, and they can't see. Mm-mm. They really couldn't see.
They couldn't see.
And So he said, here I was just standing there on the runway watching this plane go off into this blizzard with my daughter praying she makes it.
Yeah. Oh, you talk about praying going on. It was like nothing.
It was intense.
So he got home. Well, then, okay, now you've got to realize we'd gone without sleep, all of us, the night before at this point. None of us had any sleep, and the exhaustion from
we didn't sleep
the
for
emotional
2 nights.
Yeah,
because all this happened with Elly. All this happened with Elly like at 10 o'clock at night. Well, of course, we stayed awake to make sure the plane even made it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Mike came back to the house, and he said, you got to get stuff packed for Tawra. So I was having, and my mind, what I'm saying was, this is no sleep. You've got chronic fatigue, and I have to pack up everything somebody else needs for 2 weeks. They said pack up at least 2 weeks worth of stuff. So to get my muddled brain, and I've been taking care of BJ at this point, almost a toddler, and I can't even describe the exhaustion. I can't even describe it. And I have to think what clothes to put in a suitcase, what toiletries for somebody else to pack in a suitcase for 2 weeks. But one thing, I always keep saying this, I know, but the older I get, the more I find this so fascinating, how God does things in our lives that we don't even realize. You got to remember, Tawra had been on bed rest, and for, I don't know how, 4 or 5 months, I had been putting all the laundry away. I had been cleaning up everything in the house. I knew where every item was in your house. So that really helped me because I could go right in. I knew where her panties were. I knew where her tops were. I knew where her jeans and pants were. I knew where all this stuff was because I'd spent the past few months putting stuff away. So that did help. If she'd done it on her own, I wouldn't have no idea where to even look for this stuff. You see what I'm saying? To put in the bag. So just start looking at the little things in your life that God puts in your path. At the time you think, well, why did this have to happen? But it was a good thing it did happen so I could know where this stuff was. So Mike and I were getting stuff ready for the trip because they were going to be gone for 2 weeks. And we got everything packed up in the car. And it was really late at this point, but we both were going to try to at least relax and rest a little bit. Neither one of us slept. And it was about 2 or 2:30, I think, when they finally arrived. When Mike called me, and he said they made it. They made it there safe, because we were worrying about the storm, let alone her condition. We had a double whammy here going on.
That plane should not have been flying in that
It shouldn't have. It shouldn't have. They shouldn't. That's why I say those guys were unbelievable to even let that plane come, fly that plane in that storm. And so the miracles God does in our lives.
They're all alive and kicking.
They are.
They're all trying to kick them out of the house.
Yeah, they are. And so, so they made it. So we got up. We got up really early, 5 or 5:30 again, and I had to drive over with Michael. Well, we hadn't even been to sleep really. We were up again So we'd gone 2 nights at this point, and went with Michael up to the hospital to pick up my car because we were both so tired the night before, we didn't think we should, be driving and all this other stuff. So I went with him, and him and Tawra took off for Spokane, driving the 4.5 hour. I was worried about Tawra still because she wasn't in great shape, she really wasn't doing, but really good. But they finally...
Well, and the roads were really bad from the blizzard.
So, they were driving up there on bad roads. And so it was hard. And we had no cell phone. So I had to sit there not knowing what was happening, what was going on. And that emotionally can just zap the life out of you.
Because we had to go, I think, it was normally like a 4-hour trip, and I think it took us like 7 or 8 hours to get up there. It was a really long time because the roads were so bad.
Yeah, because I think they got there in the afternoon, earlier middle afternoon, something like that. And I remember because BJ had taken the one nap, and I tried to lay down with that, but you called about the time he was taking his one nap. And so then that night, and I'm kind of telling this more from my perspective because I know they were dealing the stuff they were going through, a whole slug of things up there. But that's kind of like their story. So I'm kind of telling from what was going on in my area, with BJ and I. I hadn't really slept very good during this one nap. So that night, I went to bed and I was trying to sleep. I was up 4 different times with mon frere, letting him in and out. BJ woke up twice in the night. So I couldn't fall back to sleep in between each time. So this was like the 3rd night that I'd had maybe 30 minutes of sleep, and then I would be up for a couple of hours and then 30 minutes of sleep. By that next morning, it was so, the exhaustion, I'd never felt anything quite like this before. And I was really concerned because BJ was toddling. Can you imagine running after a toddler in this condition? And I was kind of afraid that something would happen because I was so bad physically, and I didn't want anything to happen to him. And I don't know why this really made me feel bad. I don't react too badly to people doing things. I kind of try to understand or take it with a grain of salt, but there was only one family we knew very well up there at all, and they once again were in another town. But it was so bad, I called them and I said, I really need help. If your daughter could just come, they had a teenage daughter, and watch BJ for about 2 hours so I could sleep, because I thought I was going to literally pass out or become unconscious. I was that bad. If you could come up and, or she could come over and just watch him. And I remember them saying, oh no, she's got a youth group meeting today, and so she won't be able to do that. And they didn't say, well, could one of us come over and watch him or anything like that? And I said, oh, okay, that's fine then. And I hung up. And that really hurt me so bad because we were so desperate I was so desperate. And so I can't even remember. I'm such bad shape. I can't even remember what happened the rest of that day. I think what I did is I set him up kind of like in a playpen area, and I just kind of was passed out almost. Not passed out, but just in and out consciousness while he just played in that area. It was really bad. That night then, I did sleep a little bit. I got a few hours sleep, but mon frere, the dog, just did get me up a couple of times, but it wasn't quite as bad. I think it was like on the 4th day. I can't remember if it was the 4th or 5th day. It was, that whole time was kind of foggy. Michael called because I still had not recovered. And Michael called and he said his folks were coming in to see Elly. They were flying in from Colorado to see her, and they wanted to see BJ too. So he said he would go ahead and drive down and get BJ and take BJ up to the hospital because, oh my goodness, I wish I could just give medals all over the place in this video to everybody, because BJ was, they were at Ronald McDonald House, and he was allowed to stay up there with that Ronald McDonald House. We've talked about them before. I don't know what we would have done without them. They are, if you want a good organization, they were unbelievable in helping Mike and Tawra. And then BJ got to stay up there with him. And I was so glad because I didn't know, I knew I couldn't last a full 2 weeks at the rate I was going. And so that really, really helped us a lot. So then I'll just tell them a little bit about you bringing Elly home. So then after...
Well, and what Mom isn't telling for our portion, while we were up there, we ended up having car problems. Our car broke down. We were having issue after issue. And Mike's parents aren't the most relaxing people to be around. So it wasn't real pleasant up there at the hospital either.
See, they were having their own things.
Yeah, so there was a whole other
thing that was happening with them. So then finally she got to come home. She was all better and she got to come home. So I was all excited. I got the house all cleaned, their house all cleaned, had this meal all prepared. And Tara called and she said that morning said they were going to be leaving as soon as the doctor checked them out, because they had a 4.5 hour drive now. And she called again. She said, they have not showed up. This was about 11 o'clock or something, I think. What time did you end up leaving? Do you remember?
We didn't leave till 3.
I was going to say the afternoon.
3.
So then she called me.
Well, and then we found out another storm was coming.
Yeah.
And we had already checked out of the Ronald McDonald House, and we were just waiting at the hospital. And back then, we didn't have money to be spending on hotel rooms. I mean, I remember thinking, we were there 10 days or 2 weeks at the Ronald McDonald's house, and I was like, how are we going to come up with $100 to pay for this? We didn't even have $100 to pay for the Ronald McDonald house. So, because they charge you like $10 a night or something. And so they told us that morning we were leaving. The doctor still hadn't showed up at 11.
And so then she called finally later in the afternoon. It was about, like she said, 3.
I was really mad. I was getting really mad.
She said, we got to get out of here because there's a storm
And the
coming.
nurse is like, well, he has to discharge. And it makes me angry because what I should have done back then was I should have picked her up and left. Because our lives were in danger. Mm-hmm. Because they were dinking around.
Yeah. And so I got a meal ready because I knew about what time they were going to be coming in, and I was getting that all ready. And so they should have been, you left about 3, so you should have been in there on normal circumstances.
4.
Yeah.
Or I mean 7.
7. And they didn't show up. And I thought, okay, why are they not here? And you didn't, once again, no cell phones. They didn't have a place where they could just pull over and pop in and call me. Mm-hmm. The way that road and highway was, it wasn't easy to do that. I had no idea what was going on because we weren't getting a whole lot at our place at that point. Mm-hmm. You guys were getting up there. And I kept waiting, and I thought, they should have been here a long time ago. And I had this feeling something was not, by 9 o'clock, something was really wrong. And so I started praying like crazy. And then I think I turned the news on. I never watched the news, but I thought, well, what, thought, well, at least I'll turn the news on. There was they said there was a horrible ice storm, they were showing pictures of cars everywhere in the ditches. It was all right where they were coming from. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And I didn't know what to, there was nothing I could do. I had to just sit and wait. And it was like we had just been totally run through the mill at that point with everything that kept happening. And finally, what time did you get home?
It was like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I was just sitting there waiting this whole time, just waiting for them. My 2 grandbabies, my new grandbaby I hadn't even held yet, Tawra and Mike. And I didn't even know if they were dead or alive. I mean, the accidents and stuff were that bad, and they were saying it was really bad. And, it was really...
Well, so what happened was we left at 3 o'clock. We hit the storm about an hour after we had left. All these other people had hit the storm, and what we didn't know was there was a fatal car accident ahead of us. We actually saw the car in flames, and the road got shut down. Well, we had to detour, and Idaho's not like Kansas and Colorado, where all the roads go straight through and all the roads crisscross, and you can take a back road and hit another one, and it's easy. Yeah. In Idaho, you have to go around
2
mountains.
roads.
You have to go you have to go down valleys. You have to go around mountains. You can't just hit a side road.
Just to show you, I don't mean to interrupt, but just to show you, there was a mudslide on one of the roads in Idaho. My folks were coming to visit us, and they were at the bottom of Idaho. They had to drive all the way into Oregon and up through Washington, up through the state of Washington, and turn around and come back down into Idaho. This is how they had to go with one road being...
So what we were doing in the middle of that was we saw this horrible accident, which thankfully, I mean, it could have been us. So thankfully, it wasn't. But we had to take a back way to get around this accident in a blizzard with this toddler who wouldn't go to sleep. I mean, he would not sleep.
BJ wouldn't sleep.
He would not sleep. Mm-hmm. And so we remember he had this little Elmo music thing. And we just kept playing that thing over and over, entertaining him. And it was, a really long trip.
Yeah, it was rough all the way around.
4-hour trip took what? 12? Not quite. No, not. 4-hour trip to...
About 10.
10 hours?
About 10.
8 hours? 8 hours?
Yeah.
Somewhere around
So
there.
it was unbelievable, but they did finally get home safely. So
to find Crazy Eddie had torn up our carpet. The little
see, I was at home. I was staying there, still babysitting the 2 dogs, Crazy Eddie and Mon Frere. So I was babying them. That in itself was a challenge. It's like, oh my goodness. I just remember
walking in the house, seeing the torn up carpet, and I'm like,
it was rough, especially because we were trying to sell the house. I think we'll stop here because if you can believe it, things got worse. Things got so much worse after they got home. It was really, I thought, we could relax now and it would be easier, but things got much more interesting. I think we'll finish that off with the next video.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
Please like, subscribe, and share. Please check out our Dining on a Dime cookbook and visit us at livingonadime.com.
Bye-bye.